She felt that you could go to an interior designer and get something quite amazing. I wouldn't classify myself as an interior designer, but I can do interiors. These buildings were being built from the ground up. So I was sitting around tables with architects and fitting and speccing out floors. I remember an editor saying to me once, "Why are there so many gay designers and how come they always get it right? And do you wear your clothes?" And no, I don't wear my clothes. Were I women, I would wear my clothes.
Ben de Lisi, Hollywood fashion royalty, A-list TV star, the man who brought glamour back to our high streets via Debenhams. Who is the man behind the design career spanning over 4 decades? What does it take to become the designer that Kate Winslet calls when she needs a dress for the Oscars? And what qualities does a designer need to take and create a successful fashion design brand and then translate that into a successful home brand? Let's start to explore and understand Ben de Lisi and his rules for a successful life. It's time to challenge design perspectives with one of the world's most cherished and well-respected designers, Ben de Lisi.
I'm glowing and my face must be red. Is it?
It's your favourite colour.
I'm wearing it.
I mean, you are, I just have to just acknowledge you. You are immaculate. You have kind of a presence. When you walked in today, how?
My mum and dad always said, fine feathers make fine birds. And it was all about how you present yourself, whether you had the money or not. So when we didn't have the money, she bought well, but small amounts. So we had the right jacket and we had the right shirt and we had the right pair of shoes. So I was brought up knowing that taste mattered. And I think style is something that comes from within. And fortunately, my parents had oodles of it, so they passed that on to me.
And the name Ben de Lisi, that sounds like something like some aristocracy, or what's the heritage of it?
It's Italian American, Southern Italian American. My name is actually Benedetto, so Benedetto, de Lisi, small d-e, capital L-I-S-I. And so the story goes.
Parle Italiano?
No. I speak French, but I don't speak Italian.
Okay, why?
Because my parents were lazy, and they were Americans. They were born in America, and they could speak Italian with their parents because my grandparents were Italian. But and I remember them speaking it to my grandparents, but they never used it at home. Americans, when it comes to languages, are kind of snobby and lazy because the country is so big and vast, and we don't need anything else. So unfortunately, we never learned it. But I remember when I was conceived that and born, my mother had to name me after my paternal grandfather, and his name was Benedetto. And she tried to broker a deal with my grandmother and said, "Can I call him Benedict, the derivative of Benedetto?" And my grandmother said no. And she said, "Well, what about Bennett?" And my grandmother said no. So hence she lost that battle, and I became Benedetto. But I always knew that my name was Benedict. I didn't know it was Benedetto. It wasn't until I had to meet with all the little boys in school. We had to go to meet the nurse, and we were asked to pick up a card off the desk, and I was looking for Ben or Benedict, and I found this big Italian name, and I sort of swiped it. I can remember just swiped it, clutched it, and then went home quite irritable and said, "How could you do this to me?" And she said, "It was a long story. I fought with your grandmother, but I grew to love it. It's a beautiful name. From Sicily, they are. They're my father. The de Lisis came from Sicily, and my mother's side came from Calabria. So they were all very, very southern."
Oh, and that's interesting about you have a home in Ibiza.
I have a home in Ibiza.
Place in Battersea.
Yes.
And you're from New York, and you have heritage from Italy.
So yeah, an Italian-American born British designer. Yeah. So, yeah, and I'm British as well. So, the country accepted me way a long time ago and have the passport to prove it.
I wonder if culturally, any of the kind of, the fact that you have, origins in so many different places, I wonder if that's in any way influenced you as a designer.
I think that I come from a creative family, and we have the eyes of creative people. So we look at things, everything is a little vignette. And I think we're highly emotional and vociferous, kind of dramatic kind of people.
Mm-hmm.
So everything is inspiring. And I've been known to say that the world is my studio, and when I look at, I could be walking down the street and see, a drapery in a house, or a plastic bag floating, or someone's sneakers, and it will trigger something to make me think of something. And so I find inspiration everywhere.
Has it always been like this?
It's always been that way. Always been that way.
Since you were how old?
Well, I remember being very cognizant of how Mum would dress when we had to go out. School clothes, what we wore on Easter. I remember, things like that. And when I first started to, have an after-school job and I could afford to buy my own things, and just knowing instinctively what was right for me.
So, for example, why would you, today you look exquisite, immaculate, and you have red on, which I think I've researched is one of your favourite colours.
It is my favourite colour.
Yeah.
It's everywhere in all my properties.
Okay. So talk me through why you would have chosen what you're wearing today from a design point of view, from an aesthetic.
Well, I knew it was going to be a relaxed atmosphere.
Is this relaxed?
Yes.
No, not this.
This.
Your outfit is relaxed. I mean, it's impeccable.
This is relaxed for me. I'm in blue jeans and trainers, and I have a kind of red cricket cashmere sweater on and a navy blazer. It's as dressed down as I'm not a sweatpant kind of person.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not that kind of person.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel I'm really truly dressed unless I wear a white shirt.
Mm-hmm.
I have 60
white shirts.
At least, and all the same, from Brooks Brothers. They're all the same.
Mm-hmm.
I have them both here and in Ibiza.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally, I'll wear a blue shirt, but I'll never wear anything else but a white or a blue shirt from Brooks Brothers. What is red? Red is such a saturation of color, and for me, it's invigorating and exciting, and I'm always gravitate to it. Always gravitate. If I walk to an art fair and I see ceramics, and I see something that's red, I will go to it.
So from a design perspective, that would be a starting point for you?
Yeah, I mean, generally red is in all my color palettes. There's a version of it in all of my color palettes. And it punctuates a rather neutral palette of a house with floors, American walnut floors and cream walls, and then it will be punctuated with red and striped kilims on the floor, and you'll have a cacophony of red gloss on the dining table, and you'll have some black Sèvres French ceramics that are lined in red lacquer on the sideboard. So it's bits and pieces everywhere. And then you go through the French doors to the garden, and you'll see big red glazed pots with agaves in them and olive trees and stuff like that. So you bring the outside inside and inside outside.
Talk about that. Let's just get back to you as Ben, and I want to talk a little bit more about your childhood. And I read somewhere, I'm not sure if it's correct, did your grandmother raise you?
No, Mum and Dad raised me, and we lived in Long Island, in a little town called Hop Hog, which was an American Indian name because there's a lot of American Indian reservations out there in Suffolk County. And I moved out there when Dad built the house. So I was about 3 months old when Mum and Dad, I was born in Brooklyn. We went out there. And they later on had my brothers, so it was the three of us.
Three brothers?
It was 3 boys.
How did you find growing up in a testosterone-filled home, or is that just
It was crazy because Dad worked as many jobs as he possibly could to keep and to make ends meet, and Mum raised us and taught piano lessons on the side. So it was and there was a lot of families because we lived on a street where my aunts lived next door, my cousins lived next door to them, and there was an uncle in the back. So we were all in each other's pockets. So it was very nurturing and very loving and very demonstrative and very loud. And as you can imagine, an Italian-American family is not, there's nothing reserved about them at all. And it was fantastic because I had this unconditional love, which I never, ever doubted at all. And I had the kind of parents that said, fortunately for me, just do what you want to do and do what you're good at. And they pushed you into doing what you were good at, but they never made you think that you had to be a doctor, lawyer, Indian chief, accountant, or anything like that. If you excelled in singing, then become a singer. If you excelled in art, become an artist. If you excelled in dance, become a dancer. They were very pro pushing us to what we did, what we could do best at. So they didn't pressure you, which I think it was great, actually.
Phenomenal
Yeah,
parenting.
It was great.
And at what point in your life did you think, I am inspired by design? Design is where I want to create my legacy.
I had an Uncle Frank who was my grandfather's brother, who was he was a bachelor and immaculate and would always come out with fantastic shoes and his overcoat, and he was always pristine. He was a very keen artist, and he was a very accomplished designer. And when my grandfather died, he took over the role of parenting my father and my aunt when my grandfather Ben died. So he was quite instrumental in our family. And I remember him making my mother's clothes and my Aunt Rosalie's clothes. And he would make the most exquisite dresses, and there was nothing. He would do things that were comparable to Dior. So he'd walk down the street and he'd see something and he'd sketch it on a tiny little bit, scrap of paper in his pocket, and he'd make it, and he'd make these glorious garments, which my aunt still has, and my cousins still have from their mother. And I think that's when I started to notice it. When I became actually hands-on as a designer, it was and I said this story many times, so you probably have heard it. I wanted a pair of trousers, and I couldn't afford them. And by that time, I was living with my grandmother. I was 1920. I moved from Long Island and lived with Grandma in Brooklyn because I was going to an art school in Brooklyn. So the natural progression was to actually move in with Grandma. Grandma and I were fantastically close, and we had a wonderful time living together. And I said to her, Grandma, I saw these trousers that I want to buy. And she said, well, can you afford to buy them? And I said, no. She said, well, then you're going to have to make them because you can't afford to buy them, because I can't afford to buy them for you. So she said, okay, let's go. And we went to a fabric store on Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn, which was lots and lots of fabric stores. And we went and found the fabric. And then she bought a pattern that had a block for a trouser that would sort of suit what I wanted. And I remember her, and she only lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. It was a railroaded apartment, so it has a bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, living room. That's the way. And I slept on a sofa bed in the living room. Best time of my life. And after she cooked supper, we put the patterns on the table. We cut out the trousers, and the sewing machine was in her bedroom. And it was one of those big industrial machines. And she put the instructions on the wall, and she went into the kitchen and she started me off, and she said, now make the trousers. And she checked me every 10-15 minutes, and if she looked at it and she didn't like it, she'd rip it out and she'd tell me to do it again.
How did they come out?
By the end of the day, I had a pair of trousers with a fly front and a welt pocket in the back. And then from then on, I just made, whenever I wanted something new, I went out and bought fabric, and I made it. So I got the bug, and I started to design things for myself. And then I answered an ad I saw in the Village Voice for a young artist. and it was for a gal named Penelope. Her name is Penelope. Her name of her company was Penelope, and she's still my closest, dearest, and oldest friend. And I remember, like it was yesterday, I dressed in a suit for this interview, and she was on Union Square in New York. And basically, she wanted an artist to paint on fabric for her collection. Anyway, I got the job, and my first commission was that she had, I think, an order from a catalog, which in those days was called Brownstone Studio. It was a very prolific catalog. And they ordered a gardening smock for women to wear when they were gardening, and the pockets and stuff. And it was gingham, and it was very apple pie mom and Coca-Cola, kind of really typically American. But the pocket had a bouquet of red geraniums coming out of it, hand-painted, on a blue gingham background. So my job was to hand-paint blue gingham, on the blue gingham fabric, geraniums. And I think she had an order for, 1,500 units of this thing. And I remember I was going to get paid 50p a pocket, 50 cents a pocket. And I had to sort of streamline how I was going to do this to make it worthwhile for me. So I went home and I was thinking, and I looked at my aunt's, she was putting her makeup on, and I saw these little round sponges that she would dab her makeup on with. And I said, Aunt, let me have one of those. Let me see. And the way I pinched it and I put it in the paint and I blotted it on the paper, it made a petal, and it made a perfect petal. And if I pinched it closer to this end of it, it made a perfect leaf. And I thought, this works. And that's how I started. And I started working with Penny, and I became very close to her, and then we became business partners, and I started designing with her, and one thing led to another, and I learned my craft the hard way, and I was selling the collection around the country.
And is this before you studied at Pratt?
No, this was after. So I studied at Pratt. I was at Pratt for 2 years, and then
so that was your bedrock.
I studied at a community college in Long Island, where I got my associate's degree, and it was a community college because this is all I could afford. And then I went to Pratt, and I got a partial scholarship to Pratt, which was really good. And then Mom and Dad helped me with the rest of it. But then there was no more money. And I remember going for my first day of school and getting called from the administrator's office and say, well, the finance isn't in place for your next year. And I said, okay. And I went home and I never went back because I didn't want to borrow money. I didn't want my parents to borrow money. So I found the job with Penny and I went to work. I went to work at 20 and I started working. And I worked until I started my own business.
Because you have had an incredible career that's transcended over 4 decades.
A long time. Since I moved, I started my company properly in the late 80s, early 90s.
And your company with Penelope?
No. I started my own company in New York in the early 80s. And my company was a menswear company. Because when I left Penny, I was prohibited to design women's clothes contractually. So I started a menswear, and I did a menswear collection, which I cut on the floor of a brownstone that I bought with my partner at the time. And I made this collection and sold it to, very, very high profile stores in America. And it was a great launch and did well for 2 years, but then with all small businesses, you fight the small business headaches, so I wasn't able to keep that going. And then I moved to England and subsequently started with an associate, started some restaurants. and then during lunch and dinner would cut. I found some fabric that I loved, and I bought all of it, and then I cut the fabric between lunch and dinner, put all the tables together, and I made a collection of 12 pieces. And then I picked 5 stores. So I picked Fortnum and Mason, I picked Liberties, I picked a store on Beecham Place, I picked a store on Kings Road. I picked 5 stores, and I got 30,000 pounds worth of orders
For fabric?
from that 12-piece collection. And
From which you created menswear?
no, this was women. When I moved to England, I started women's wear. And
Why did you move to England?
for love. For love. And then I went back, and between lunch and dinner, I would cut the fabric, and upstairs from the restaurant, I had a studio, and I sewed 3,000 garments myself, and then paid one of the waitresses to deliver the boxes to each of the clients so that I wouldn't be perceived as a one-man band. And then after that, 30,000 turned into 75,000. So I didn't have the space, so I had to take a studio. And I took my first studio on Margaret Street. And that was exciting. And then I was in the business. And then
Under the name Lisi?
under the name Benedetto. That's when I first started here. In this country, I started under the name Benedetto. And then I realized that because I wasn't familiar with the way London was laid out, I shortly found out that being on Margaret Street was the wrong side of the tracks for someone who was
Where is Margaret Street?
in the West End. So it's on the other side of Oxford Street. And it's typically known as rag trade.
Rag trade.
And I was designer, so that was the wrong place for me to be.
Where did you need to be?
I needed to be either in Mayfair, Soho, that side of it, that side of the.
Do you think that's still relevant to nowadays?
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got to be in the.
But now Fitzrovia is very hip and cool. So I think if designers, if they could afford it, I doubt it. I doubt that any young designer these days could afford a studio in that area. But I did then move to Poland Street, and
you had a shop front there?
I had a shop front on Silver Place in Silver Place in Soho first, and then I moved to Poland Street, which was around the corner from there. And it grew, and then I hired a PR company, and we were battling with Benedetto versus Benetton. And Benetton had just started, Benedetto was there, and I was being confused, and so we started to introduce Lisi over the label, and then we dropped the Benedetto, and then Lisi was born. And then I was kind of accepted into the fold of the London Designer Collective, where you had people like Jasper Conran and Joe Casey Hayford and Betty Jackson and all of those people, and I was accepted. And then I realized that, okay, I'm accepted.
Who needs to accept you?
The editors. The editors of the magazines, and then there were the 2 groups. The designers was the London Designer Collections. That was the sort of higher end, and then there was the designer collections. And I started there, and then I was able to move over. The British fashion industry is not the most palatable industry. It's a very forgetful.
Of what? Forgetful of what?
You're in one day and you're out the next. So there's there's very fickle, and they're not very loyal.
Because I'm interested in, so you are traditionally educated in New York in the design, in a very highly regarded design school. And you take your design skills and translate them from fashion over to home, and I'm interested in that. I guess that journey.
I think what happens is as you build a name for yourself in a particular facet of the industry. And it didn't come to fruition until, I took to the catwalk when I thought I was ready. I got good reviews, and I started to.
Well, this is.
Yeah, this was a Kate wearing that dress. Well, that was a very memorable dress, but she wore about 12 dresses before that.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a coming of age for me, and I think I'll never forget it, and it still rears its head every Oscar time because I'm the 13th most famous dress in Oscar history, which is wonderful.
But you're Lisi, you're famous in fashion. How does that then translate?
Well, it happened quite organically. I was asked to design. This is exactly how it happened. I was asked to design. This woman came to me and said, I'm the sales director and marketing director of a public company called Countryside Properties up in Manchester. And we've acquired this piece of land just near the Lowry Hotel.
How did she know who you were? How were you on her radar?
She just looked on in the press, and I was riding a crest at that time because I had dressed Kate. I had won Designer of the Year for Glamour in 2 years in succession.
I think you're quite modest. There must have been a flavour, a Ben Lisi flavour that she was attracted to.
Well, I think she was probably attracted to the fact that I was understated and my style was quite quietly elegant. And it wasn't high octane glamour, and I guess my sense of color attracted her too, because she felt that you could go to an interior designer and get something quite amazing. I wouldn't classify myself as an interior designer, but I can do interiors. But I wouldn't never presume to say that I'm an interior designer. I have been commissioned to do interiors, and I think that the people who have commissioned me to do it for my aesthetic. But I would never say that I'm trained like, other very well-known interior designers.
So would you call yourself a fashion designer?
I call myself a fashion designer, but I've been employed to do interiors.
Purveyor of interiors.
Yes. And then, so I did those interiors, and it became the fastest selling project in Manchester. So I was then given another project called the NV Buildings, and another one in Didsbury, and another one in Prestwich.
So were you home staging or interior?
No, I was doing, these buildings were being built from the ground up. So I was sitting around tables with architects and fitting and specking out floors and how floors and walls passed each other, and if we could put a shadow gap, and how we could hide the curtain rods so that the ceiling floated, and whether the floor could go up the wall a little bit so that the window, and doing things like that, and then specking the bathrooms, which I designed, which then led me on to getting a bathroom license to do bathrooms, Ben Lisi bathrooms. And so I did that, and then obviously you do the show apartment, and you kit it out and you furnish it and you put your stamp on it and you do that, and that's what the consumer sees and that's what the consumer buys, and it became a very, very fast selling product. So Ben Lisi went. At that time, I was starting to be courted by Debenhams before they even had designers at Debenhams. It was at a time where there was a very famous milliner who will remain nameless, started there, but they had no clothing designers. So I was approached, and I decided, okay, I'll do this, but I'll give you my initials, not my name. So I gave them BDL. Then they started building up their stable, and so you had the likes of Jasper and John Rocha and Betty Jackson and Pierce Fianda, and you had so many. So I thought, okay, you can have Ben Lisi. So I started, and I did a line of evening wear from Ben Lisi. And it was very rewarding and profitable, but I was still battling small business aches because I had a shop on Elizabeth Street at that time, and it was a very well-known brand, but it suffered small business problems.
I'm sensing that for you, creativity is your passion as opposed to the
I'm a businessman. I'm a creative person. I'm a businessman. I hate numbers.
numbers.
Numbers drive me crazy. I hate numbers till today.
That's why we have accountants.
I hate them. I hate them. They are evil.
As long as you've got good numbers on your bank account.
Yeah, they're evil. Numbers are evil. And so I always sort of turn the page and hid it under a magazine and that. So whilst I surrounded myself with people that could do those things, it sapped me of all my creativity. And it got to the point where it wasn't fun anymore. Life was difficult. It wasn't fun anymore. And so I made a very conscious decision to save what was best about Ben de Lisi and get rid of what was bad about Ben de Lisi.
And what did you keep?
The brand. Ben de Lisi, the
Which
brand.
Which means what? What does it embody?
Me.
Who are you?
Protect me, protect the brand. That was my baby. That was what I gave birth to all those years ago, and I had to protect it.
Classic, timeless.
Yes. If
elegant.
you can go to a party and see a woman wearing a dress, I can go through my press books and show you a dress from 1997, and you could say, I would see that hanging in Joseph's window today.
Do these same values, I love Joseph, do these same values translate to home?
Yes, you look at a room and you play up its attributes and you play down its detriments, just like you look at a woman and you play up her attributes and you play down her detriments. I haven't met a woman alive who was happy with their lot. There's always something that they wish was different.
Yeah.
And women,
I concur.
Women don't celebrate themselves the way they should celebrate themselves.
Do you think men celebrate themselves?
No. No.
Maybe it's just a...
I think women are more
human.
I think, listen, as I've gotten old, I'm very vain, and I think of myself, my body's changed a lot. No matter how fit I think I am, I look at my body and I think, well, it wasn't that way 10 years ago.
Obviously,
I look at my skin and say, it's not as supple as it used to be. It doesn't spring back the way it was. But I consider myself, one of those.
Perfectionist?
Yeah, to the point where my partner, because he's absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Can I ask you about, is it Gerardo?
Yeah.
Yeah? Why are you connected to him for the amount of time you've been connected to
22
him?
years it'll be.
Is he in design?
No. He's in agriculture and gardening and all of that, so the outside.
How does he inspire you, or does he inspire you?
He's like no other person I've ever met.
How?
He's a thoroughbred. There's just no other way to look at it. There's something so innately rich about him inside and outside. I've never met anybody like him. He has incredible integrity. He's got a very, very high protective trait in him. His capacity to enjoy life is off the charts, which drives me crazy, because I'm such a control freak that I find it difficult to stop and smell the roses. He is good at that. He always keeps me grounded. I don't think I need to be grounded, but I think he thinks I need to be grounded. He's painfully beautiful to look at and gets better with age. He's 17 years my junior, which is interesting because I don't feel it. And I'm a nurturer by personality, and he, I think, needs nurturing. So the partnership works.
Beautiful. There is a saying, what you see in me is alive in you.
Yeah.
So everything maybe you've said about him is you.
Well, who knows?
Beautiful, elegant.
Who knows?
I want to know about how do you go about working with the NHS and designing their kind of iconic gown?
Well, I tried to. It won awards. It was in the Design Museum. It won awards and everything, but
Congratulations.
it was good. It was called Design with Dignity, and it was a garment. It was a hospital gown that didn't show your backside. So
Was that their brief to you, or
they said to me, we need X amount of things, and they pitched to me, Ben, design the hospital gown. So I put it together, and I did this sort of evolution of a woman's tunic to a dress to a nightshirt to a hospital gown. And
is this kind of an insight into your process,
your
design process?
That's how I did it. That's how I did it for this particular product.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say that's the way I do it. I always start with color when I design.
Right, interesting.
I always start with color when I design. And I start with art. So color and art will be the pivotal moment of how a collection comes to pass. Mm-hmm. But this was such a designated, specific thing that I had to design. And I remember pitching it to them and showing how it evolved from this top to a tunic, from a tunic to a dress, from a dress to a nightshirt, from a nightshirt to a hospital gown. And it was, it opened on the shoulder and it opened on the side, and it was the kind of gown that if someone was incapacitated, couldn't get up, they could get to her body or his body without having to get them up. They could get the wires or IVs or tubes or everything into the gown without, it was very, very carefully thought out, and it won an award, and it made newspapers everywhere all around the world. Mm-hmm. Even Gerardo's father in Chile opened the Mercurio, bought the Mercurio on the Saturday, which he reads religiously. On the front cover of the paper was Ben Lisi and the hospital gown. Mm. We had a Labour government at the time. The money was all allocated to produce this hospital gown. And then the Labour government, the government changed, and the money was pulled, so the gown didn't get produced.
Okay, but the experience
was wonderful. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm curious about, you mentioned about you made it work for, you really thought about the person.
Oh, I went to the hospitals. I had to go to the hospitals and into wards.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about how that translates to your home design. Sometimes, a designer, the whole debate about form over function.
Mm. Everything,
which came first?
I think for me, when I was asked to do, if we go back and after the whole countryside thing in Manchester and then the Debenhams thing, and then the CEO of Debenhams called me up and said, Ben, I want you to come to the office. And I came to the office, and his name, and I will call him my angel. Later on in the conversation, you realize why he was my angel. Mm-hmm. And he was a man called Rob Templeman. Mm-hmm. Rob Templeman and Michael Sharp, two wonderful men. Mm-hmm. And Rob said to me, I want you to come with me. And I remember this was when the offices at Debenhams were next door to the store. And he opened a door in his office, went down a hallway, and it opened up onto the floor of home furnishings. And he walked through the floor of home furnishings, and he said to me, you know what, Ben? I wouldn't buy anything here. I said, okay, what do you want? He said, I want you to do something. I want you to do a collection. Mm. And this is going to be your budget. This is how much we're going to buy. And we're going to start you off with betting, because betting is the barometer to know whether or not you got it, what it takes, and whether the consumer will believe your brand and believe you. Mm. Anyway, so we started with betting, and it went from 0 to 1,000 like that.
Why do you think?
Sense of color, sense of...
Which is your starting place.
Which is my starting place. It was a museum of modern art kind of aesthetic, Danish, geometric. There's nothing very florally about me. It was all quite straight lines and geometry and color and stripes and circles. And
was that unique at the time?
Well, it was for their remit. Mm. They didn't have anything like it. Mm. So you could go to the higher end and go to some place like Conran's and get something remotely like it, but you have to pay a price for it. But you couldn't get it at Debenhams at a price. So luckily with their buying power, they could do it. Anyway,
some might consider that a risk, to go into one of the UK's biggest retailers and to attach your name to a product that potentially is unique to their demographic. I mean, that's, for me,
their demographic was
courageous.
Vast. Their demographic was vast, huh? It was huge. It was huge. And their demographic
really
was
worked.
their demographic was not a person. I would say they were a very savvy consumer. You know, they liked style, but they wanted it at a price. You know, they might have been living in the Shires, and perhaps they could have afforded to go to Harvey Nichols or Harrods or, you know, Selfridges or Conran's, but they were spending their money on perhaps sport, education, holiday, garden. The house was, they could do style, but they could do it their way. So that's who their customer was. And the one thing about the Ben DeLisi homeware collection at Debenhams at the time was it had a sense of humor. So when the Ella cushion was born,
The iconic French bulldog.
it was named after Ella. It was my first Frenchie. And that cushion was the fastest selling product over all classifications, clothing, homeware, in Debenhams.
Why do you think?
It was, I think, the size, the color, the make of it. It was all hand. It was all hand sort of embroidered and felted and quilted, and it was bright and red, and it had a sense of humor, and it was just the beginning of when Frenchies were visible, and it became crazy. And this little pillow, this big, sold for £15, and you could then if you could find it in Debenhams, because it couldn't keep up with production, people were selling them for $85 on eBay, because they'd buy them and sell them again on eBay, and that's when Debenhams went full pelt with me, and I then did, you know, bath shop, kitchen shop, tabletop, bedding, towels, everything, ceramics, art, wall art, and it was a very strong brand, as was Principles by Ben DeLisi at the time, because I had that. And then we all know what happened to Debenhams. You know, they made mistakes. Unfortunately, I got out before everything hit the fan. But, you know, I don't regret it. I had a lovely time there. I learned a lot, and I made a lot.
Creatively, are you inspired? Would you say that you have been inspired as a designer?
Always.
Yeah.
Always. Always. Whether it's designing a dress that's going to retail for £70 or designing a dress that's going to retail for £7,000, it's still inspirational. I've been working for the last 3 days on prints for my collection, my new collection, which is, you know, being launched. Actually, it's finished, that one. It's going to be launched in October. And then I've got Q1 and Q2 for spring, summer. And I'm working on prints now. So I'm very hands-on. And, you know, I'm an avid collector of art. I'm an avid collector of ceramics. I look at things all the time. I'm constantly going to, you know, markets and antique places. And yeah, I don't have wall space anymore. I don't have wall space anywhere in the house in Battersea, and certainly not in Ibiza. So paintings are actually propped up against the floor now. So, and there's paintings under beds. You know, and they will always inspire me to do something. Always.
Okay, so currently, what projects are you working on? We know what happened after Debenhams.
So we know what happened after Debenhams, and me being a person who is, I don't like not having choice. So that what contract ended, and I wasn't ready to say the universe is telling me, giving me a message and said, Ben DeLisi, stop and retire in Ibiza. So I approached a chap, and he became my agent, and I was introduced to the people at QVC. And it was an incredible beginning, and I met them, And I started a collection with them, and it was very successful. And then, as we all know, we all hit the wall with the pandemic. And that was in 2018, 2019. But subsequently now, they've realized that the brand is very valuable for them and their consumer. Their demographic is not dissimilar to, I might add, Debenhams. So they knew that I ranked quite high in recognition amongst their demographic. So they've taken the license of Ben de Lisi, and they're now going to be producing my collection. And I launch my new collection, which is Autumn-Winter Q4, in October of this year.
Is this fashion or home?
This is fashion.
Okay.
So it's going to be clothing, handbags, accessories, shoes, and then there is a homeware collection which is already sampled, which is Watch This Space.
Good. Look, I bought you these because they're American.
Oh, Reese's Peanut Butter Cups.
Do you like them?
Yeah, I love them.
Okay, sell me one of these. As if.
Well, apart from what we would say is, give me something that goes with chocolate. Give me something that goes with peanut butter, but you can't say jelly.
Peanut butter and toast.
I would always say peanut butter and chocolate because of Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. In America, a PJ is what we all eat. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
In the
which
UK, it's pajamas.
Yeah, I know. PJs,
Yeah.
pajamas. We call
Yeah.
them PJs. Or private jets, if you're in that.
PJ. That's your league. Good luck with QVC.
Yeah, thank you.
So can I just ask you quickly? So if someone said to you, like, change the design of an iconic thing like a Reese's Pieces, just quickly tell me what your process would be.
Some things don't need to be redesigned. Some things, there's a saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I would never take that commission. Never. Just like they say, how many times I've been asked over the years, what about the Queen style?
What if I said...
Don't touch the Queen style.
Okay, but everyone's got a price. If I said to you, if I'm Mr. Reese's Pieces, Ben, I'm going to give you £4 million. What's your price?
Golly, I don't know. What would I change? I don't know. I guess
Have you got a price?
Everybody, we all have a price. But, that would be... it's so perfect. The little cup, the little scallop around the edge. What would you going to change it to a little square and then it's going to be something generic like somebody else? No, I wouldn't do it. I would have done it 15 years ago when I needed the £4 million.
Yeah.
I don't need the £4 million.
Yeah, I think this is a silly question, but I want to like trends. Like
I don't follow trends. No. I don't follow trends. Trends come and go. Styles last forever.
Has that been a challenge as a designer? Because, for me, there's a lot of sheeple in the world, and sheeple like to follow trends.
I'll tell you what. My first fashion show, I put a note from me on every seat in the audience that said, if you're coming here for theatrics, you're at the wrong show. I'm going to show you beautifully made clothes that flatter women's bodies. And I stuck to that mantra my entire life.
Through your home?
Through everything.
Interiors?
Everything. I don't think there are trends that happen. And yes, there are geniuses out there. I would never think of thinking that I'm the kind of designer that, like Alexander McQueen, bless him. He's a visionary, a genius. He was very cerebral in his approach and how he made these sort of stories in theater, and it was extraordinary. It took me a long time, and I have to admit it, to understand it and to be appreciated. And when I saw his exhibition, both in New York first, and then in London, I was completely humbled by it. But I have an American attitude to evening wear. So you put me in a box with the likes of Ralph Lauren, Calvin Klein, Jeffrey Bean. In Italy, you would put me in perhaps Valentino. My approach to designing a dress. I was never sizist as well. So women of all sizes and ages would come to me to design their clothes. But I never looked I never looked at what the trends were for me to, to design a dress. I just sort of instinctively looked at how I wanted a woman to look. I remember an editor saying to me once, why are there so many gay designers and how come they always get it right? And do you wear your clothes? So that was the first minute of the interview. And I said, well, I can't answer the question on behalf of everybody. I mean, as a gay man who happens to be a designer, I just think it's a sense of my aesthetic that I projected onto the women that I dress. And I think, artists do it, dancers do it, people in the creative realm do it. And there's a part of us that we project that way onto canvas or dance or women. And no, I don't wear my clothes. Were I women, I would wear my clothes. Mm-hmm. Because I dress for the woman that I'm not. Mm. Because I know who she is and what she wants. And she's not a woman that dresses for her husband or dresses for anyone else. She dresses for herself.
And I feel after meeting you, that would be one of the takeouts from this meeting with you, that you are a human, a designer that is connected to, you are connected to your passion and you deliver what you truly believe. And you are an authentic, integrity-filled, honest human. And I think that's probably part of your success and why people will come to you with projects like the NHS, like the house company in Manchester, and why you will continue to be a success. Lisi, it has been a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. I'm very
glorious.
I'm very flattered to have been here. Wonderful interview. Loved it.
You're beautiful. So thank you. If you have, undoubtedly, it's just been a pleasure to meet Lisi. Please remember to like and subscribe, and to join me again at the same time next Monday, where I'll be joined by another guest, and together we will be challenging design perspectives. Bye.